lectionary gives us a really nice plan for working our way through a large amount of scripture, dividing it into little bite-sized pieces. What it doesn't do well, though, is give us a big picture. The way the Gospel of Mark is constructed, the order in which the stories of Jesus are told is part of the message. We get a sense of the urgency with which Jesus acted by the quick pace of Mark. Often there are words like immediately or right away, or while they were doing this, they also did that. These are stories within stories, like the woman being healed of a hemorrhage while Jesus was on the way to heal the daughter of Jairus. There are stories sandwiched between other stories that act as bookends for what's happening in the middle. A few weeks ago, the lectionary gave us the story of Jesus feeding a crowd in Israel. Soon we'll encounter a story of Jesus feeding a crowd in Canaan. Mark tells us of Jesus moving from community to community, but also from region to region, in and out of Jewish territory and in and out of Gentile territory. We know that he traveled on foot or in fishing boats, so that paints a really small picture of the significance of his travels. We can easily miss the importance of phrases like crossing over, or going to the other side, or being in Canaan versus being in Israel. We live in a very big country with restrictive borders. We don't just cross Lake Michigan and end up in a new country. The closest we come to understanding the movement of Jesus would be back pre-9/11, when we could very easily cross from Detroit to Windsor with almost no awareness that we're in another country. The only way that we would actually know is because the money looked funny, there were a few strange customs, and people didn't know how to pronounce out and about. Back in those days, we Michigan Americans often traveled into Canada with the same attitude as the Jews in Jesus' day carried when they crossed into Canaan, a sense of superiority. Our money was worth significantly more on the exchange rate, and that helped us to feel like we were better than the people who lived in Windsor. The story of the encounter between the Syrophoenician woman and Jesus is filled with nuances that we can very easily miss. Calling her and her daughter dogs is reminding her that although he is now a guest in her country, he sees her as less significant than the people of Israel. She is only a Canadian after all, and he is a U.S. citizen. Even in her own country, she is less because she is not a U.S. citizen. Add to that, she's female, not male, and her precious child is not just a mere child, but a female child. But contrast that with the fact that she is apparently a person of means. She has a house that includes a bed for her daughter. Jesus is a traveling teacher and healer, known to step out with few resources for his journeys. So we have a woman of means going to a man, begging of a man who has little or nothing to seek help for her child. And here's the next big taboo: a woman going to a man who is not a relative, and then boldly speaking, interrupting his conversation, asking for help for her daughter. And she has the nerve to challenge him when he tells her he won't help. Those Canadians are pretty bold. The exchange between this mother and Jesus is a reminder that in God's economy, there is enough. Even the crumbs are bountiful enough to feed everyone if we're willing to share them. When we keep the best for ourselves, we still have sufficient crumbs to take care of everyone else. It's really easy to get caught up in a fear of potential scarcity. Mark reminds us that God's grace, God's love, God's blessings are plentiful, and we can share what we receive from God without fear of shortage. The second feeding that we're going to encounter in Mark's gospel happens in Canaan, a clear message to people in the early church that God's blessings are for everyone, not just the people on the Michigan side of the Detroit River. Once we get past the uncomfortable, initially snarky conversation Jesus had with the mother in our reading, we move directly to another healing story. This time, a man who is deaf and has a speech impediment. Notice, though, he is also a citizen of another country. This time, Jesus heals him without making an issue of his citizenship. Jesus has moved from an attitude that limited his responsibilities to only people like him to all people. It's no longer important who the man in need is or where he is from. What is important is that he is in need, and Jesus is able to respond to that need. I think it can be really easy for us to read these healing stories and be absolutely amazed at the miracles Jesus performed, be in awe of the connection he had with God that allowed him to heal people, and then leave the stories there. Not internalize them as motivators for our own actions. We use the stories to help us recognize the special nature of Jesus, but not to challenge our own behavior. In these stories, Jesus did what he could. He didn't have incredible financial resources or amazing medical facilities or a team of the finest medical personnel to help him perform his healings. We can look at these stories, be in awe of Jesus, and also be challenged to follow his example and do what we can with the resources we have. If all we have to offer is our love, we can be loved. If all we have to offer is our listening ears, we can be compassionate listeners. If all we have to offer is the apple or banana left over from our lunch, we can give that rather than do nothing because we can't provide a full meal. We can do what we can with the resources we have available. Recognizing our neighbor in the faces we see, loving our neighbor with the love we receive from God, means doing what we can to be love. Being willing to cross borders and step over boundaries without a superiority attitude is part of living faithfully, part of responding to God's extravagant love for us by sharing that love with whoever, no matter who, no matter where. God doesn't expect us individually to solve all the problems of the world. God does expect us to do what we can. Even small acts are important. Remember the story of the woman who anointed Jesus with oil? The people around the table were very critical of her, saying she wasted expensive oil instead of selling it and using the money to help the poor. But Jesus scolded them and praised her, saying, "She'll be remembered because she has done what she could." That's our goal, to do what we can. We've been challenged to step over lots of boundaries in the past 50 years or so. We've dealt with and continue to deal with boundaries of racism and sexism. As people of faith, we came to see those distinctions as bad and have attempted to move beyond prejudicial attitudes toward people of color and prejudicial limitations of women. As an open and affirming church, we've committed to removing the barriers between us and gender and sexuality minorities. We're working to remove barriers of accessibility right now by widening doorways so that our church can truly be able to welcome all people. No one excluded from the warmth of the Salem family. We offer both wine and juice and regular gluten-free bread for communion, and we've extended that invitation for communion to all ages people so that no one is excluded. We're consciously moving in the direction of loving all people with the same extravagance as we are loved. But being on that path toward truly loving doesn't mean we can get comfortable and start taking it easy. Even churches that are known to be safe, welcoming places need to keep their eyes and ears open, watching for opportunities to be even more safe, even more welcoming. We're all on our own life's journeys. The key word is journeys. It means we're moving, not that we've arrived. For as long as we live, We are on the journey toward loving God with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. It means we're in process, not completely accomplished. Some days we don't fully love God. We love our comfort or our country or our sports or something else first. Some days we don't love our neighbor very well. We might not even recognize them as neighbors. Maybe they're from Costa Rica instead of Canada. We love our Canadian neighbors, but what about our Cuban neighbors? Or what about our Puerto Rican relatives? Do we love them as we love ourselves? Do we demand our government take as good care of the people of Puerto Rico after a hurricane as our government takes of the people of Florida or Louisiana or Texas? And do we love ourselves? It's difficult to be loving toward our neighbors if we don't even like ourselves, let alone love ourselves. Fortunately, life is a journey, and we are able to move from shortcomings into doing better. Fortunately, we are resilient people with the capacity to learn and grow. We grow more and more loving all the time, moving step by step closer to fulfilling the great commandment to love. Amen.